Everyone, this is Scott Stengel from Melco Applications, here to start a two-part series on how to digitize and also embroider on Madeira's Easy badge film. This is the hefty version. Here's a piece of it, probably a little bit weird to see. It's sort of a medium weight. It does have sort of dots on one side, and this would be just put inside the hoop and you'll stitch directly on this. It is a heat sensitive film, so after we're done we're gonna shrink up the extra pieces and all that around the outside. Also, since the logo we're going to be stitching is relatively stitch intensive, 8,500 stitches roughly, we're going to use 2 layers of this. Josh claims that there is sort of a grain to it. The dots more or less run one direction. So when we sew this, we're going to do 2 layers and we're going to cross hatch it. Again, next week Josh will do the presentation on how to take this design that I'm going to show you how to digitize and to put it on freestanding patches, and also to heat seal, adhere it to different types of garments. We all run into that stuff where we can't stitch on something such as the bill of a hat. We always get asked that. So this would allow you to make freestanding patches, and then you could heat apply them to things like that. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, with these designs on this type of film, it shrinks up, and so finish as you go is going to be very, very important. It's going to shrink up, like I say, as we're stitching on it. So if you have an area that's got black outlines and detail around it, you want to make sure you take care of that kind of as you stitch it, instead of waiting till the end and having it drift a little bit on you. Okay, so let's start out with it. First of all, we're going to make an entire fill background in the design. I'll turn off 3D here. Pretty simple fill. If you have areas that are voided out, you might really consider about filling them in solid, because the film can be a little bit difficult to remove from open areas. So consider that. But basically you're making an entire patch, so we're going to fill the entire background of this design. So nothing special here. I'll show you the properties of the fill. Very important with this stuff that you keep as many stitches off of the design as you can. So I guess think of it a little bit like performance wear. You don't want to get puckering, and so you're going to leave as many stitches off as possible. So for this one I used a 4.2 density fill, a little bit light, but covers just fine. Nothing special here except for the stitch angle. That decides the direction that the fill sews. I tried 2 different settings for this. My favorite is kind of 90 degrees for a bunch of different reasons. This one turned out much better at 75 degrees. Reason is 75 kind of at an angle, it sort of doesn't have any real flat areas where the fill is parallel to the border, the fill direction. So 75 turns it at an angle a little bit, fills in a lot more of the other areas. I mean, the other alternative, like I say, with 90 degrees is, with this, it's very consistent with the lettering, if you know, that usually goes on top. Because it runs parallel to the satin stitches, normally you would be thinking, well, that's gonna create a lot of sawtooth, but when letters are small, they don't do that too much. But what it does is it gives you a very consistent look. An example of this, let's say you've got we've probably had logos that are a circle fill, like a donut, and then has arched letters around the whole thing. And you're looking at it going, well, why is this E at this angle different than the E that's straight up and down? And they're the same E, but they look different. It's how the fill reacts at different angles with the top stitching of those letters. And so 90 degrees tends to give more consistent results to me because it's not jumping. At 75 degrees, it would be kind of like if you're stitching on a knit shirt like piqué or something, and you have letters that are slanted forward. They're always jumping the weave, and so they can give a little bit of trouble when it comes to clarity. All right, so I recommend trying 75 degrees for your fill direction. What Madeira recommends is, they say 3 underlays. I found I did okay with 2. And so what I'm going to do to make it simple is just use the auto underlay fill. So I'll go to the underlay tab, and you can see primary is a fill, secondary is also a fill. What's important here is the border margin. You want to back off from the edge of the fill, because what you're trying to avoid with this is cutting it before you punch it out, and too many stitches will sever the fabric. So if I offset the border margin, how far the underlay edges come out as compared to the fill, and I set them in, and you can see I also changed them. So this one has 10 point offset where the second has 15, so they're going to be staggered a little bit. So we're going to keep them inside. I run a density of 45 on each one and a stitch length of 30. The angles 90 and 45, so they're kind of cross-hatched. So that's it for the underlay. And I'll close this guy down. Also, what's really important, if I turn on the whole design again, you can see, if I go into 3D, it might be easier to see. The fill is stretched way to the outside of all this. Again, this fabric is, it shrinks a lot, and so I want to make sure that my fills are stretched way to the outside edge, just inside of it, when it comes to the long direction of the fill. So you can see I stretched all these here, around here, and especially around here. This is a very long fill when it comes to sewing across, so it's gonna pull a lot. Okay, so first, or another thing to consider is you're gonna really need to stretch your fills. Okay, then when it comes to the lettering, nothing real special here. I used edge walk on them to separate the border a little bit, so they stand up crisp, but I left off the zigzag. Here again, we're trying to cut the stitches, so cutting the zigzag out of it doesn't make the letters sit down too much further, but it does cut a lot of stitches out of it. So normal properties here on this stuff, like 3.7 density, short stitches on, edge walk, nothing special here. I did use center out is what I kind of digitize everything, as we've sort of hammered on you guys through these presentations, but it is important. So it will sew ELCO and then come back for the M. Nothing else really special about the lettering. And then last of all, we're going to do the border. I used a single line, nice consistent even width around the whole thing, fast to digitize. You can see here there is no underlay. Again, I could have used an edge walk or a center walk, which I normally would do, but the more penetrations I can keep from that outer edge, the better chance I'm going to have that it stays in place before until it's finished and I decide I'm going to pop it out. Okay, so pretty standard single line. I turned on the mitered corners. They're going to be very important with this stuff because, I'll show you down here, with something like this, if I didn't have corners and it would try and stitch all the way around here, I'm getting so many needle penetrations in here, it's just slaughtering it. And so you have to have something like that. If your design shop level doesn't have corners, you can digitize this in a column 1 or a column 2 yourself. I'll show you just a little portion of how I would do it if I didn't have single line corners. I'll just say start here. You can sort of start the corner over manually, and heck, I did this for years myself. Alright, so that's one column that overlaps. And then I'm going to walk up to the top, and I'll start another column. Just continue on like as if it was a point of a sun, a ray, or something like that. And so on and so on. So now you can see in 3D, it's really pretty easy corner to digitize if you don't have single line corners. Okay, let me get rid of that. And then I'll show you the whole design. Okay, so if I slow redraw it, here you can see it starts out with the double cross-hatched underlay, 75-degree angle fill. I used a 4mm stitch length, so nice and long because I don't want tight penetrations. I don't have real small letters on top, so there's really not a need for a tight fill stitch length. Then it goes through the letters, sort of center out, pushing towards the outside. And then I'm going to do the single line column border around the outside to finish it up. Boom, done. So this is kind of how easy it is to digitize the freestanding patches on the badge film. So next week Josh is going to take this design and he's going to show you exactly how to set up the machine and everything you need to be successful sewing this, as well as putting an adhesive backing on it, a heated adhesive backing that will adhere it to the garment. I hope this was helpful. Enjoyed giving you the presentation, and we will catch you next time. Thank you.